So now one thing that I get a lot of questions about, that people seem to get a little bit hung up on when they're going about a real estate purchase in New York City or any other large city in America, is exactly what is the difference between a condo and a co-op. People could come into the market thinking they're wanting a condo, but really they want a co-op, and vice versa. And it's because they don't really understand the difference. There's actually quite a big difference. They have different legal structures, they can have very different pricing, and the process of going about purchasing one is very different. So in this video, I'm going to break it down for you. What are the differences between a condo and a co-op in New York City? Okay, so in this video, I'm going to break down the differences between condos and co-ops, both from a legal perspective, pricing differences, and the different processes for going about purchasing both. But before I get started, I want you guys to please help me out. Help me out with that YouTube algorithm and press that little subscribe button right down there and press that little notification bell. I'm posting these videos all the time and I don't want you guys to miss out on anything. So press the subscribe button, leave a comment, and don't forget to like the video. Thanks. Okay, the first thing you need to understand about the differences between condos and co-ops is they have very different legal structures. A condo is built by a developer, which is also called a sponsor, and they're sold as real property to individual clients. That means when you buy a condo, you actually get a deed to that property and you own it. Basically, ownership of a condo functions exactly like ownership of a single-family home, except for the fact that you would only own a percentage of any of the common areas of the building. The condo board would oversee the management and the financial viability of the building itself, but your unit would basically be yours to do with as you see fit. A co-op, on the other hand, is a completely different legal structure. A co-op, which is short for cooperative, is by definition a piece of real estate that is jointly owned by a cooperative. The cooperative members would form a corporation or an LLC that would own the building and the land it's built on. As the purchaser of a co-op, you would actually be purchasing and owning shares in that company, and that would come along with a proprietary lease for your unit. In a co-op, you do not actually own real property. Your unit is considered personal property. So because of the differing legal statuses between condos and co-ops, the experience of buying them is actually quite different, both in terms of pricing and restrictions on their use. And it should be noted that in New York City, co-ops are much more common than condos. Of the available units for sale of apartments in New York City, at least 70% of them are co-ops. So a lot of people come into the market and say, oh, I only want a condo, I don't want a co-op. And they realize that really limits their selection. So it's important to know the differences between both types of units, and then you can decide which one is better for you. So generally, because condos are a much newer phenomenon in New York City, there definitely tends to be stylistic differences between them. Condos tend to be much newer buildings. A lot of times they could be quite modern in their design, and they tend to have a lot of amenities. At the very least, they're going to have gyms and meeting rooms and common lounges, and then at the higher end, you're going to get things like squash ball courts and hammams and juice bars and Olympic-sized lap pools. Co-ops, on the other hand, tend to be smaller pre-war buildings. A lot of them are brownstones, and they're going to have that intimacy and warmth and that quintessential New York City vibe. So you're getting into the market, and the question is, which is right for you? Well, let's look at some of the key differences to help you decide. Number one is price differences. Condos tend to be 20 to 40% more expensive than co-ops. So you may hear that and think, mind made up. Co-ops are less expensive, let's go for a co-op. But let's look at some of the other differences so you understand what you are and aren't getting for your money. Okay, limitations on use. This is number two, and this is really the biggest difference between condos and co-ops. Most co-ops have very strict board regulations governing their use. Now, every co-op is different. Some are more strict, some are more lenient, but generally they have much stricter rules than you would ever experience in a condo. Co-ops across the board cannot be used as pied-à-terres. If you're getting this as a second home, a crash pad to have when you're in the city, that's not going to be allowed in a co-op. Co-ops generally want single owner occupied units. Also, subletting can be very difficult in a co-op. To sublet your co-op, you're going to have to get approval from the board. Many co-ops just flat out do not allow subletting. Others do allow subletting on a case-by-case basis. Some do allow subletting but would charge you a fee for that. Also, if you want to make renovations to your co-op unit, you'll need approval from the board for that too. Remember, co-ops are cooperatives. The whole building is run as one company, so that co-op board is going to have veto power over a lot of uses that you might want for your apartment. Condos, on the other hand, there is a condo board, but it's often much less strict. Pied-à-terres are allowed in condos. Renting is allowed in most condos. You can easily buy a condo for somebody else, which is difficult in the co-op situation. So generally, condos are much less strict about having rules governing their use. Okay, financing. This is number 3. There are differences on how you can finance a condo versus a co-op. A condo in New York City, you can finance with as little as 10% down. Co-ops, on the other hand, you've got to have at least 20%, and some co-ops will ask as much as 50% down to purchase. Also, a co-op board is going to thoroughly investigate your finances when you go to purchase, so be prepared for that. If you're not prepared to have a certain pretty high level of transparency about your finances, you want to think about a condo. Most co-ops are going to require a specific level of debt-to-income ratio and a certain amount of post-closing liquid assets. Now, what does that mean? Basically, once you pay all the closing costs in your co-op, you're required to still have a certain level of cash reserves. Now, all co-op boards have different rules on post-closing liquid assets, but you can expect to be required to show up to 24 months of your monthly maintenance costs in the bank. Now, closing costs, this is number 4. There are differences here. Co-ops tend to have lower closing costs, but they can take longer to close because of the board approval process and a longer financing process. Co-ops tend to be less expensive to close because they're not considered real property. For example, there's no deed, so you don't have to pay title insurance or mortgage transfer tax. Now, there are some charges in co-ops that aren't in condos. For example, the flip tax. A lot of co-op boards will charge a flip tax, which is basically a percentage of the profits to the building from the seller when the unit changes hands. Now, exactly who pays the flip tax is always negotiable, so you should talk to your agent about that. Okay, maintenance costs. Maintenance costs in co-ops tend to be higher because they not only include the general monthly maintenance on the building, but they also include the property taxes, and they could include an underlying mortgage on the building. Remember, in a co-op, the co-op owns the entire building, so they must own and maintain that building. Condos have much simpler maintenance fees. They basically cover the services and maintenance to the common areas of the building, and then property taxes are paid individually by unit owners in a condo. Now, monthly maintenance in condos can sometimes still be quite high, especially if you have a lot of services in the building and a lot of amenities. If you have an outside company that's managing the amenities in a condo, you can still expect pretty high maintenance charges. Okay, another thing to know about if you're going into the market for a condo or a co-op in New York City, and I'm just going to touch on this really briefly, is sponsor units. Sponsor units are basically units of the condo or co-op that have been retained by the sponsor or person that turned that building into a co-op after all the other units are sold. And sponsor units come with a lot of advantages that regular units don't have. Specifically, they're not subject to the rules of the condo or co-op board, so they can be rented. They can be renovated. There's a lot of freedom in a sponsor unit that you wouldn't have in a regular unit. Now, you do need to watch out if you're buying a sponsor unit. There may be a tenant in place in that unit that you may not be able to get out. So you could end up getting a great deal on an apartment that you're not able to live in, at least right away. Also know that the market for sponsor units is highly speculative, and there's a lot of investors in that arena. So it's good to know about. You can definitely get a great deal there. You could definitely potentially get a co-op unit that you have a lot of freedom in, but you need to really educate yourself about that market if it's something that you're thinking about. Okay, so now that we've gone through all the major differences between condos and co-ops, hopefully you're going to be a much more educated consumer and have the knowledge you need to find an apartment that you love. If you need more help trying to decide which type of apartment is right for you in New York City, feel free to reach out to me. I always post my number in the description below the video, and I pick up my phone when it rings. If you already have a great agent, great. I encourage you to trust your agent and follow their advice. A great agent will always have your interests as their primary concern, and they will be an invaluable asset in finding your new home. Well, that's all for now, guys. I hope this helped. I'll see you next time. Bye.